In the vast expanse of the Andromeda Spiral, where 1,000 alien civilizations have risen and fallen across millennia, one truth has remained constant. Humans are the weakest species ever to achieve spaceflight. Their bones break like glass, their skin tears like paper, and their lifespans flicker by in what other races consider mere moments. When young Marcus Chen stepped onto the neutral station of Nexus Prime, the assembled delegates from across the galaxy saw exactly what they expected. Another fragile Terran, soft and naive, stumbling through a universe designed to crush him. But in the shadows of that same station, something ancient stirred. Eyes that had witnessed the birth and death of stars turned toward the human boy with recognition that sent ripples of unease through the cosmic predator hierarchy. For the first time in 10,000 years, Kethvar the Voidstalker, a creature whose very name made entire armadas change course, spoke a word in the old tongue that roughly translated to kinship. The galaxy was about to learn that evolution doesn't always favor the strong. Sometimes it creates something far more dangerous. The clever, the adaptable, and the utterly unpredictable. What they mistook for weakness was humanity's greatest weapon, and Marcus Chen was about to prove that the most dangerous predator in the universe is the one nobody sees coming. The mocking would end. The real education was about to begin. The docking bay of Nexus Prime hummed with the controlled chaos of interspecies commerce. Massive cargo haulers from the crystalline Vextai civilization unloaded precious minerals that sparkled like captured starlight, while sleek Zerathi warships hung in the void like predatory fish, their hulls scarred from countless battles. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, built by 17 different species over 3 centuries, its architecture a testament to what the galaxy could achieve when working together. Marcus Chen felt decidedly out of place as he stepped off the modest human transport vessel New Horizon. At 19 standard years old, he was young even by human standards, though ancient civilizations like the eldest would consider his entire species to be children playing with dangerous toys. The artificial gravity generators created a comfortable environment for most species, but Marcus still felt the subtle wrongness of being so far from Earth's embrace. His arrival hadn't gone unnoticed. The main concourse of Nexus Prime was a vast circular chamber with observation decks rising in tiers, allowing different species to monitor the comings and goings according to their various atmospheric requirements. As Marcus made his way toward the customs checkpoint, whispers began to ripple through the assembled crowd. Another Terran chittered a delegation of insectoid clicktar traders, their compound eyes gleaming with amusement. "Ha ha ha! Look how it struggles with the standard gravity. We could crush it with one appendage." A group of Golvani warriors, each standing 3 meters tall with height thick enough to deflect plasma bolts, laughed with sounds like grinding stone. Their leader, General Thoric, had personally conquered 14 systems and commanded respect throughout the Outer Rim territories. "The humans send children to negotiate," he rumbled to his subordinates. "Perhaps they hope we will take pity on their weakness." Marcus heard every word. Human hearing was surprisingly acute compared to most species, something the galaxy hadn't quite figured out yet. But he had been preparing for this moment his entire life, and his father's words echoed in his memory. "Let them underestimate you, son. It's the only advantage we have, and it's a bigger one than they know." The customs checkpoint was staffed by a Nexari bureaucrat, one of the neutral species that maintained Nexus Prime as a free trade zone. The Nexari resembled tall, elegant crystals with a liquid consciousness that flowed through their translucent bodies. They were known for their fairness and attention to detail, which made them excellent administrators but terrible conversationalists. "Purpose of visit?" the Nexari customs officer inquired, its voice ringing like wind chimes.
"Cultural exchange program," Marcus replied, handing over his documentation.
"I'm here to study comparative civilization development under the Galactic Accord Educational Initiative." The documentation was authentic, though it didn't tell the whole story. Marcus was indeed a graduate student in xenoanthropology from Mars University, but his real mission was far more complex. Humanity had recently discovered something that would change their standing in the galaxy forever, and Marcus was here to conduct a very specific experiment. Duration of stay? 6 standard months. Accommodations arranged, student quarters in Section Gamma. The Nexari processed the information with the methodical precision of its species. Behind Marcus, a line was forming as other passengers from various ships waited their turn. He could feel their eyes upon him, assessing, judging, dismissing. To them, he was exactly what he appeared to be. A young, soft, weak human, trying to play in a universe dominated by beings that could tear him apart without effort. "Welcome to Nexus Prime," the customs officer finally said. returning Marcus's documents. Please be aware the gravity in the outer sections varies according to species requirements. Medical facilities are available should you experience physiological distress. Marcus thanked the officer and moved into the main station. Nexus Prime was truly impressive, with sections designed to accommodate everything from the high-pressure methane environments preferred by the Drakti to the low-gravity crystal gardens where the Vextai conducted their trade negotiations. The central hub maintained a standard atmosphere that was comfortable for most humanoid species, though Marcus noticed the oxygen content was a bit low by human standards. He found his way to the student quarters, which were modest but clean. The room was designed with adjustable features to accommodate different species' needs, though it had clearly been set up for human occupation. There was a standard bed, a workstation with galactic network access, and a small food preparation area stocked with human-compatible nutrients. After settling in, Marcus made his way to the observation deck of the main cantina. This was where most of the real business of Nexus Prime was conducted, where deals were struck and alliances formed over exotic beverages and games of chance. The deck offered a perfect view of the commercial docking bays, and more importantly, it was where the various species representatives gathered to socialize. The cantina was a feast for the senses. Bioluminescent lumina traders painted patterns of light across their skin to communicate with each other, while the reptilian Sorak delegation shared a table laden with what appeared to be still-moving delicacies. In one corner, a group of energy beings from the collective flickered in and out of visibility, their forms barely contained by specialized environmental suits. Marcus ordered a simple water. Alcohol had unpredictable effects when mixed with the various atmospheric conditions different species required, and found an empty table where he could observe and listen. This was the real purpose of his mission, to gather intelligence on how other species perceived humanity, and to test a theory that could revolutionize Earth's position in the galactic community. It didn't take long for the conversation to turn to humans. The galaxy loved to discuss the peculiar species from the small blue world in the unfashionable spiral arm, though rarely in flattering terms. "I heard they're trying to establish a mining operation in the Kepler sector," said a Drakethi merchant. Its tentacles writhing with what Marcus had learned indicated amusement. "The ore density there would crush their bones to powder. Typical human arrogance," agreed a Vorthan trader. The Vorthans were known throughout the galaxy for their military prowess and their disdain for weakness. They think technology can compensate for their biological limitations. Marcus sipped his water and continued listening. The conversation was following a predictable pattern. Amusement at human audacity mixed with genuine bewilderment at how such a fragile species had managed to survive long enough to achieve spaceflight. What none of them knew was that this very underestimation was about to become humanity's greatest strategic advantage. A new voice joined the conversation, one that made the others grow quiet with respect. It belonged to Commander Vex of the Hegemony Fleet, one of the most feared military leaders in the Outer Rim. Vex was a member of the warrior caste of the Keptari, a species that had conquered half the known galaxy before deciding that maintaining an empire was too much trouble. They now served as elite mercenaries, selling their military expertise to the highest bidder. "The humans serve a purpose," Vex said, his scarred hide bearing the marks of 100 battles. "They make adequate clerks and technicians. Their attention to detail is useful." This was actually a compliment by Keptari standards, but the other species took it as confirmation of human inferiority. Marcus found it fascinating how each species' cultural biases shaped their perception of humanity. The warrior races saw them as weak and cowardly. The trader species saw them as naive and easily exploited. The scientific civilizations viewed them as primitive and backwards. None of them saw the truth. Marcus finished his water and prepared to leave, but his departure was interrupted by a commotion near the cantina entrance. A group of young Gorvani warriors had cornered what appeared to be a human maintenance worker, their massive forms towering over the much smaller figure. "Look what we have here," one of the Gorvani said, his voice carrying clearly across the cantina. "A little pink creature trying to fix things beyond its understanding." The human was middle-aged, wearing the simple coveralls of station maintenance staff. His name tag identified him as Rodriguez, and he was clearly trying to complete some kind of repair work on one of the atmospheric processes. The device was designed to maintain optimal air quality for different species, and Rodriguez had apparently been called in to fix a malfunction. "Please," Rodriguez said quietly. "I just need to finish this repair. The Nexari administrators requested it." The Gorvani found this hilarious. "Did you hear that?" the leader laughed. "It thinks it can fix Vextai crystal technology. These humans, they have no understanding of their limitations." Marcus felt his jaw clench, but he forced himself to remain seated. This was exactly the kind of situation he had been sent to observe, How did the galaxy react when humans were present? How did they treat human citizens of other worlds? The data would be crucial for the report he would eventually submit to Earth's diplomatic corps. The confrontation escalated when one of the Gorvani decided to help Rodriguez by pushing him away from the device. The human stumbled but maintained his footing, though his toolkit scattered across the floor. The atmospheric processor began emitting an ominous humming sound, indicating that the malfunction was getting worse. "Now look what you've done," the Gorvani said with mock concern. "The little human has made things worse. Perhaps we should throw it out an airlock before it breaks something important." The suggestion was meant as a joke, but the casual way it was delivered sent a chill through Marcus. To these beings, human life was worth so little that its destruction could be treated as humor. This was the reality his species faced every day in the wider galaxy. Rodriguez, to his credit, ignored the taunts and began gathering his scattered tools. But the atmospheric processor was clearly in distress now, its humming growing louder and more erratic. Other species in the cantina began to take notice, some moving away from the area as a precautionary measure. "The human has sabotaged station equipment," one of the Gorvani declared dramatically. "This is what happens when inferior species are allowed to handle advanced technology." That was when Marcus noticed something the others had missed. Rodriguez wasn't panicking or fumbling with his tools. His movements were deliberate and precise, despite the harassment he was enduring. More importantly, he was smiling slightly, though he was careful not to let the Gorvani see it. The atmospheric processor's humming reached a crescendo, and several species began evacuating the immediate area. The Nexari staff looked concerned, their crystalline forms flickering with agitation. Emergency lights began flashing, and automated warnings echoed through the cantina in 17 different languages. Then Rodriguez did something that made Marcus sit up straighter in his chair. The maintenance worker reached into his toolkit and withdrew what appeared to be a simple molecular spanner, a basic tool that any species could have manufactured. But the way he held it, the confidence in his movements, suggested this was no ordinary repair job. Rodriguez inserted the spanner into a specific access port on the atmospheric processor and turned it exactly 3/4 clockwise. The humming stopped instantly. The emergency lights went dark. The processor settled into a quiet, efficient rhythm that was actually smoother than it had been before the malfunction. The cantina fell silent. "There," Rodriguez said cheerfully, packing up his tools. "Just needed a small adjustment to the quantum resonance chamber. Should run much more efficiently now." The Gorvani stared at him in confusion. The quantum resonance chamber was one of the most sophisticated pieces of technology on the station, requiring intimate knowledge of 17 different scientific principles to properly maintain. The casual way Rodriguez had fixed it suggested not just competence, but mastery. "How did you know to do that?" one of the Gorvani asked, his earlier mockery replaced by genuine confusion. Rodriguez smiled. "Lucky guess," he said, and walked away. Marcus remained in his seat, but his mind was racing. What he had just witnessed was a perfect example of what his father had tried to explain to him years ago. Humans weren't weak. They weren't primitive. They were something far more dangerous. They were underestimated. The conversation in the cantina resumed, but the tone had shifted. The various species were now discussing the incident with a mixture of confusion and unease. How had a simple human maintenance worker demonstrated such sophisticated technical knowledge? Was it really just a lucky guess, or was there more to it? Marcus finished his water and left the cantina, his mind already composing the first entry in his mission log. Day 1 on Nexus Prime had provided exactly the kind of data he had been hoping for. The galaxy's assumptions about humanity were so deeply ingrained that they couldn't process evidence that contradicted their preconceptions. As he walked back to his quarters, Marcus passed through one of the station's observation lounges, where large windows provided stunning views of the surrounding space. Ships came and went in a constant stream, representing dozens of civilizations and thousands of worlds. It was a reminder of just how vast the galaxy was, and how small humanity's place in it seemed to be. But appearances, as Rodriguez had just demonstrated, could be deceiving. Marcus was so lost in thought that he almost didn't notice the figure watching him from the shadows near the observation windows. It was only a glimpse, something large and predatory, with eyes that seemed to glow with an inner light. When he turned to look directly, there was nothing there. But he could swear he felt those eyes following him as he continued toward his quarters. He would later learn that this was his first encounter with something far more ancient and dangerous than anything he had imagined. For now, it was just an unsettling feeling, a reminder that Nexus Prime held secrets far beyond what appeared on the surface. That night, as he settled into his bed and began planning his next day's observations, Marcus had no idea that his presence on the station had already been noted by forces that existed far outside the normal political and economic structures of galactic civilization. He was about to discover that humanity's reputation as the weakest species in the galaxy had attracted the attention of creatures that specialized in testing such assumptions. The real experiment was just beginning. Marcus spent his second day on Nexus Prime exploring the academic quarter, where representatives from various civilizations came to share knowledge and conduct research. The Universal Library was a marvel of collective achievement, containing the accumulated wisdom of over 200 species spanning millions of years. Crystalline data storage units from the Vextai sat alongside organic memory cores from the Sylvan Collective, while quantum information matrices from the Architect civilization hummed with barely contained energy. The librarian was a member of the Keeper caste, a synthetic species created by the long-extinct progenitors specifically to maintain and protect knowledge. They were universally respected throughout the galaxy, as their programming made deception or bias impossible. The Keeper that greeted Marcus was designated Scholar Unit 7742, though it preferred the name Axiom. "Welcome, young human," Axiom said, its artificial voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with understanding. "You seek information about comparative civilization development, according to your academic credentials." "That's correct," Marcus replied, though he was careful not to reveal the full scope of his research. "I'm particularly interested in how different species first achieved spaceflight and made contact with galactic civilization." Axiom's optical sensors flickered with what might have been curiosity. "An interesting focus. May I inquire about your specific research parameters?" Marcus had prepared for this question. "I'm studying the correlation between a species' physical characteristics and their technological development paths. Most research focuses on successful civilizations, but I want to understand what factors contribute to unexpected outcomes." "Ah," Axiom said, and Marcus could swear there was approval in its voice. "You seek to understand why the galaxy's assumptions about capability versus achievement so often prove incorrect. A worthy pursuit." The Keeper led Marcus to a section of the library that contained historical records of first contact events. What Marcus found there was both fascinating and disturbing. The galaxy had a clear pattern when it came to evaluating new species. Physical strength, natural armor, advanced sensory capabilities, and longevity were considered the primary indicators of technological potential. Species that possessed these traits were immediately welcomed into the galactic community as equals or near equals. Those that lacked them were relegated to junior membership status, expected to serve rather than lead. Humans, when they finally achieved spaceflight and made contact with the Galactic Council, had been immediately classified as a support species, useful for detailed work that required patience and attention to detail, but not suitable for positions of real authority or responsibility. What the records didn't show was how wrong those initial assessments had been. Marcus spent hours cross-referencing the official evaluations with actual historical outcomes, and the pattern that emerged was startling. Many of the physically impressive species had plateaued technologically shortly after achieving spaceflight. They had the tools to reach the stars, but not the drive or creativity to push further. Meanwhile, species that had been dismissed as weak or primitive had often made unexpected breakthroughs in science, engineering, or strategic thinking. The Cathari, for example, had been written off as cowardly because they preferred to avoid direct confrontation. It wasn't until they revolutionized stealth technology and became the galaxy's premier intelligence operatives that anyone realized their cowardice was actually sophisticated tactical thinking. "Fascinating reading?" Axiom asked, appearing beside Marcus with the silent movement that characterized synthetic beings. "Very," Marcus replied honestly. "It seems like the galaxy has a persistent blind spot when it comes to recognizing different types of strength. Indeed, the progenitors who created my species often spoke of this phenomenon. They called it optimization bias, the tendency to assume that the traits which made one successful would be the same traits that would make all others successful. It is perhaps the most dangerous form of prejudice because it feels so logical." Marcus looked up from the data tablet he had been reading. "Did the progenitors fall victim to this bias themselves?" Axiom paused, its optical sensors dimming slightly. "That is a complex question. The progenitors were remarkable in many ways, but they disappeared long before achieving their ultimate goals. Perhaps they too failed to recognize a form of strength they had not anticipated." The conversation was interrupted by a disturbance from elsewhere in the library. Voices were raised in what sounded like an argument, though Marcus couldn't identify the languages being spoken. Axiom's sensors immediately focused on the source of the disruption. "Excuse me," the keeper said, moving toward the disturbance with mechanical precision. "Maintain order is part of my primary programming." Marcus followed at a discreet distance, curious about what could cause a scene in such a traditionally quiet space. What he found was a group of young Keptari warriors surrounding a human researcher, their aggressive postures making their intentions clear even without understanding their words. The human was Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to Marcus despite the shared surname, a xenobiologist from the Europa Research Institute. She was in her 50s, with graying hair and the kind of practical appearance that suggested she was more comfortable in a laboratory than a social setting. Her research materials were scattered across a nearby table, suggesting the confrontation had interrupted her work. "There is no conflict permitted within the Universal Library," Axiom announced, its voice carrying an authority that even the warrior caste Keptari couldn't ignore. "Please state the nature of your disagreement so that resolution protocols may be implemented." The lead Keptari, a young warrior with ritual scars covering his arms, turned to address the keeper. "This human has accessed classified military databases. She seeks information that is restricted to non-combatant species." Dr. Chen stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "I'm researching adaptive evolution in hostile environments. The Keptari military archives contain extensive documentation of biological warfare agents, which is directly relevant to my work on planetary colonization safety protocols." "The information you seek could be used to develop weapons," the warrior replied. "Humans should not have access to such knowledge."
Marcus watched the exchange with growing interest.
This was exactly the kind of situation his mission was designed to study. How did established galactic powers react when humans sought to access information or resources that were considered beyond their station? Axiom consulted its internal databases for several seconds before responding. "Dr. Chen's academic credentials and research authorization are valid. The requested information falls within permitted parameters for xenobiological research. However, warrior caste Thakvar's security concerns are also noted. A compromise solution is required." The keeper paused, its optical sensors flickering as it processed options. "Dr. Chen may access the requested information under supervised conditions, with a Keptari military observer present to ensure no sensitive tactical data is compromised." It was a reasonable solution, but Marcus could see the frustration on Dr. Chen's face. The requirement for supervision implied that she couldn't be trusted with the information, treating her like a potential threat rather than a legitimate researcher. It was another example of how the galaxy's perception of human weakness translated into practical restrictions on what humans were allowed to accomplish. The Keptari warrior seemed satisfied with the compromise, though he made it clear that he considered even this level of access to be excessive. "We will assign Observer Rank Keth to monitor the humans' research. Any attempt to access tactical or strategic information will result in immediate termination of access privileges." Dr. Chen nodded reluctantly, clearly unhappy with the arrangement but recognizing that it was better than being denied access entirely. As the group dispersed, Marcus approached her table. "Dr. Chen? I'm Marcus Chen, from Mars University. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation." She looked up from gathering her scattered research materials, her expression guarded. "Another human studying on Nexus Prime? That's unusual. What's your field?" "Xenoanthropology, with a focus on intercultural dynamics. I'm researching how different species interact when they first encounter each other." "Doctor." Chen's expression softened slightly. "Ah, so you're studying us as much as them. Interesting perspective. Have you been here long?" "Just arrived yesterday, but I'm already starting to see some fascinating patterns." They talked for several minutes about their respective research, and Marcus found Dr. Chen to be both brilliant and deeply frustrated with the limitations placed on human researchers throughout the galaxy. She had spent 15 years studying extremophile organisms, life forms that thrived in conditions that would kill most species, but was constantly blocked from accessing key databases or restricted from visiting certain research sites because humans were considered too fragile. "The irony," she said, "is that humans actually have some of the best adaptive capabilities in the galaxy. We can survive in a wider range of environments than most species. We're incredibly resistant to radiation and toxins compared to other carbon-based life forms, and our immune systems can adapt to threats that would devastate other civilizations. But because we look soft and weak, everyone assumes we're delicate flowers." Marcus filed this information away for his report. Dr. Chen was describing exactly the kind of misperception his mission was designed to analyze. "Have you been able to work around these restrictions?" She smiled, and Marcus caught a hint of something that reminded him of Rodriguez's expression from the previous day.
Sometimes.
You'd be surprised what you can accomplish when people aren't paying attention because they don't think you're capable of anything interesting. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Observer Rank Keth, the Keptari warrior assigned to supervise Dr. Chen's research. Keth was younger than the other Keptari Marcus had seen, with fewer ritual scars and a bearing that suggested he was still establishing his reputation within the warrior caste. Dr. Chen, Keth said formally, I am prepared to begin supervision of your research activities. Please present your specific information request for evaluation. Doctor. Chen handed him a data tablet containing her research parameters. Keth examined it with the methodical thoroughness that characterized Keptari military training, his expression growing increasingly puzzled as he read. This research focuses on microbial adaptation to extreme conditions, he said finally. Why would such information require military database access? Because your military has encountered more hostile environments than any civilian expedition, Dr. Chen explained patiently. Your warriors have fought on worlds with atmospheric compositions that would kill most species instantly, in gravitational fields that would crush normal soldiers, and in the presence of biological agents designed specifically to target different physiological systems. That data is invaluable for understanding how life adapts to extreme stresses. Keth considered this, his warrior's mind clearly struggling with the concept that seemingly harmless research could have such military relevance. I see. But why does a human require this information? Your species is not known for military conquest or expansion into hostile territories. Dr. Chen's smile was patient, but Marcus detected an edge to it. My species may not be known for conquest, Observer Keth, but we're very good at survival. And survival requires understanding all possible threats. Something in her tone made the young Keptari warrior pause. Marcus realized that Dr. Chen was teaching the same lesson that Rodriguez had demonstrated the day before. Human capabilities extended far beyond what appeared on the surface. They spent the next several hours in the military archives, with Dr. Parker Chen accessing databases that documented Keptari encounters with various biological threats. Marcus, with Dr. Chen's permission, observed the process as part of his own research into interspecies academic cooperation. What he saw was remarkable. Dr. Chen didn't just read the information. She analyzed it, cross-referenced it with data from other sources, and began building theoretical models that explained phenomena the Keptari military had simply accepted as unexplained hazards. More than once, she identified patterns or connections that had escaped the attention of Keptari military scientists. Observer Keth grew increasingly interested as the research progressed. Dr. Chen, he said at one point, your analysis suggests that the biological agent we encountered on Kreshtar Prime was not a natural phenomenon but an engineered weapon. That's correct, Dr. Chen replied, highlighting specific data points on her display. The genetic markers here and here indicate artificial modification. Someone designed this organism specifically to target Keptari physiology. The implication hit Keth like a physical blow. The Kreshtar campaign had cost the Keptari military over 3,000 warriors, deaths that had been attributed to a particularly virulent native disease. If Dr. Chen was right, those deaths had been caused by biological warfare. This information must be reported to military command immediately. Keth said, his earlier condescension completely forgotten. Dr. Chen, would you be willing to present your findings to our Strategic Analysis Division? Of course, Dr. Chen replied. Though I should mention that this is just preliminary analysis. A full investigation would require access to additional databases that are currently restricted to human researchers. Keth stared at her for a long moment, and Marcus could practically see the young warrior's worldview shifting. The soft, weak human had just uncovered a massive intelligence failure that had cost thousands of Keptari lives, and she was offering to help solve it if given the proper resources. I will speak with my commanders, Keth said quietly. Perhaps some of our access restrictions require reconsideration. As they left the archives that evening, Dr. Chen and Marcus walked together toward the station's residential sector. The artificial day cycle was shifting toward evening, and the ambient lighting throughout Nexus Prime was adjusting to accommodate species that were naturally active during different time periods. That was impressive, Marcus said. You basically convinced a Keptari warrior to question his own military's intelligence assessments. Dr. Chen shrugged. I just showed him the data. The analysis was straightforward once you knew what to look for. The Keptari are excellent warriors, but they're not particularly subtle when it comes to biological sciences. Is that a common experience for you? Finding things that other species have missed? More common than you might think, Dr. Chen admitted. Humans have a different perspective on problem solving. We tend to look at things from multiple angles, consider possibilities that other species dismiss as unlikely. It's probably an evolutionary adaptation from our early history. We had to be creative to survive on a world full of predators that were bigger and stronger than us.
Marcus was about to respond when he noticed they were being followed.
The sensation was subtle at first, just an awareness of movement that seemed to mirror their own. But as they turned a corner into one of the station's quieter corridors, he caught a glimpse of something large moving in the shadows behind them. "Dr. Chen," he said quietly, "don't look back, but I think someone is following us." She tensed slightly but continued walking at a normal pace. "Security patrol? I don't think so. The movement pattern is wrong." 2. Predatory. They reached an intersection where they would normally part ways. Dr. Chen's quarters were in the senior researcher section while Marcus was housed with the graduate students. But instead of saying goodbye, Chen suggested they continue walking together for a few more minutes. "I want to test something," she said, leading them toward one of the station's public observation areas. If we're being stalked by something that's not official security, it might reveal itself in a more open environment. The observation deck they entered was nearly empty, with only a few late-shift workers taking their break and watching the stars. The vast windows provided an excellent view of the surrounding space, where ships continued their constant traffic despite the late hour. More importantly, the open space made it impossible for anyone to follow them without being clearly visible. They pretended to admire the view while using the reflections in the windows to watch for their pursuer. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then Marcus saw it, a shape that moved wrong, too fluid and graceful to be any of the species he had encountered on the station. "There," he whispered, indicating a section of the deck where something seemed to blur the edges of normal space. "Do you see it?" "Doctor." Chen followed his gaze, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "That's not possible. There's nothing there, but my peripheral vision keeps insisting something is moving." The thing in the shadows seemed to realize it had been detected, because the sensation of being watched suddenly intensified. Marcus felt an almost physical pressure, as if invisible eyes were examining him with predatory interest. Then, impossibly, a voice spoke directly into his mind. "The young Terran sees clearly for one so inexperienced." "Interesting." Marcus spun around, but the observation deck appeared empty except for themselves and the oblivious workers taking their break. "Doctor." Chen was staring at him with alarm. "What's wrong?" she asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Did you hear that?" "The voice? What voice?" "Marcus, you're starting to worry me." Before Marcus could explain, the sensation of being watched vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. Whatever had been following them was gone, leaving only a lingering feeling that something important had just occurred. "Maybe I'm just tired," Marcus said, though he didn't believe it. "Long day of research." Dr. Chen studied his face carefully. "Marcus, if something is bothering you about the station, you should report it to security. Nexus Prime is generally safe, but there are occasionally incidents involving the more exotic species that pass through here." They parted ways shortly afterward, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his encounter with the Invisible Watcher was connected to his mission somehow. As he settled into his quarters for the night, he began composing a message to his handler on Earth, detailing the day's observations and the strange incident in the observation deck. What he didn't know was that his message would never reach Earth. The entity that had been watching him was far older and more sophisticated than anything in the official galactic databases, and it had just made a decision that would change the course of Marcus's mission entirely. In the depths of Nexus Prime's most restricted sections, where even the station administrators never ventured, something ancient stirred. Kethvar the Voidstalker had not spoken to another living being in over 10,000 years, but the young human had triggered recognition protocols that dated back to the earliest days of galactic civilization. The hunt was about to begin, but the roles of predator and prey were not what anyone expected. Marcus woke the next morning with the distinct feeling that his world had fundamentally shifted during the night. His message to Earth had been marked as "transmission failed" by the station's communication system, which was unusual given Nexus Prime's reputation for reliable galactic connectivity. More disturbing was the discovery that his room's environmental sensors had recorded several hours of readings that made no sense. Temperature fluctuations that followed no pattern. Electromagnetic signatures that didn't correspond to any known technology. He was examining the sensor data when his door chimed. Standing outside was Observer Keth, but the young Keptari warrior looked different from the confident military officer Marcus had met the day before. His ritual scars seemed somehow faded, and there was something in his eyes that spoke of a sleepless night filled with disturbing revelations. "Marcus Chen," Keth said formally. "I have been instructed to request your presence at a meeting of significant importance." "Doctor?" Sarah Chen has also been invited. "Instructed by whom?" Keth hesitated, his warrior's training clearly warring with something else. "That is complicated. The individual who issued the instruction is not part of any official chain of command that I recognize. Yet I find myself compelled to obey." The phrasing sent a chill down Marcus's spine. Keptari warriors were famous throughout the galaxy for their absolute loyalty to their military hierarchy. The idea that one would take orders from an unknown authority was almost unthinkable. "Keth, are you feeling all right?" "You seem different from yesterday." The young warrior's expression grew troubled. "I have been asking myself that question since last night. I remember going to sleep in my quarters after filing my report about Dr. Chen's research. The next thing I remember is standing in a place that cannot exist, speaking with someone who should not be."
Marcus felt his pulse quicken.
"What do you mean, a place that cannot exist? Have you ever been in a room with no walls, floor, or ceiling, yet somehow still contained? Have you ever looked into eyes that have witnessed the birth of galaxies?" "I have, and it has changed me in ways I do not yet understand." They collected Dr. Kitchen. Chen from her quarters and made their way through sections of Nexus Prime that Marcus hadn't known existed. The corridors they traveled grew older as they descended, the architecture shifting from the clean, functional designs of modern construction to something far more ancient and mysterious. The walls themselves seemed to be made of a material that wasn't quite metal, stone, or crystal, but somehow all three simultaneously. "I don't remember these passages being on any of the station's schematics, Dr. Caro," Chen murmured as they walked. "How long has this section been here?" "Since before the current station was built," Keth replied, though his voice carried the uncertainty of someone repeating information he couldn't verify. "Before any of the current galactic powers existed, before records began." They arrived at a chamber that defied architectural logic. It was enormous, with a domed ceiling that seemed to stretch into infinity, yet Marcus had the distinct impression they were still inside Nexus Prime. Crystalline formations jutted from the walls at impossible angles, each one pulsing with soft bioluminescence that provided the only illumination. At the center of the chamber stood a figure that made every instinct Marcus possessed scream warnings. Kethvar the Void Stalker was approximately humanoid in shape, but that was where any resemblance to known species ended. Its form seemed to shift and flow like liquid shadow given substance, with edges that weren't quite solid, and a presence that suggested vast depths of experience. When it moved, space itself seemed to bend around it, and looking directly at it caused a disorienting sensation like trying to focus on something that existed in too many dimensions. "Welcome, young ones," Kethvar said, its voice resonating through the chamber without using any recognizable vocal apparition. "It has been long since I have had visitors to this sanctuary." Dr. Chen stepped forward, her scientist's curiosity overcoming her caution. "What are you? I've never seen anything like you in any xenobiological database." "I am what remains when a species transcends the limitations of flesh while retaining the essence of what they once were. Your databases would not contain records of my kind, because we predate most of the civilizations that created them." Marcus found his voice, though it took considerable effort. "Why did you bring us here? What do you want?" Kethvar's attention focused on him with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. "I brought you here because you interest me, young Terran. Your species fascinates me in ways I had not expected when I first became aware of your existence." "Our existence shouldn't be particularly fascinating," Marcus said, trying to maintain some semblance of composure. "Everyone knows humans are the weakest species in the galaxy. Everyone is wrong." The statement carried such absolute certainty that it seemed to reverberate through the chamber. "Your species possesses something that I have not encountered in over 10 millennia of observation. You possess the capacity for transformation that goes beyond mere adaptation." Dr. Chen looked between Marcus and the ancient entity. "What do you mean by transformation?" "Allow me to demonstrate," Kethvar said. The chamber around them suddenly filled with holographic displays showing various scenes from across the galaxy. "Observe how most species develop once they achieve spaceflight." The displays showed familiar patterns. Powerful warrior races expanded aggressively, but eventually stagnated when they had no more enemies to conquer. Peaceful trader species developed sophisticated economies but remained vulnerable to more aggressive neighbors. Scientific civilizations made remarkable discoveries but often lacked the will or ability to implement them effectively. Each species finds their niche and remains within it, Kethvar explained. The Keptari perfect the art of warfare. The Vex-Time master crystal technology. The Nexari become unparalleled administrators. But they do not fundamentally change from what they were when they first reached the stars. A new set of displays appeared, showing scenes that Marcus gradually recognized as human activities throughout the galaxy. But these weren't the submissive support role activities that most species associated with humanity. These showed humans in situations that seemed impossible for their supposed capabilities. Observe your species more carefully, Kethvar continued. Human miners working in gravitational conditions that should crush their bones. Human engineers solving technical problems that have stumped civilizations with millennia more experience. Human diplomats negotiating solutions to conflicts that warrior species could only resolve through warfare. Dr. Chen was studying the displays with growing amazement. These images, some of these show humans in environments that should be lethal to us. How is this possible? Because your species does something that no other species does consistently. You refuse to accept limitations as permanent. When faced with an obstacle that should be insurmountable, other species either find an alternative path or accept defeat. Humans find a way to change themselves or their circumstances to overcome the obstacle. More displays appeared, showing human settlements on worlds that had been deemed uninhabitable by galactic surveyors. Humans living in high radiation environments by developing improved medical treatments. Humans working in zero gravity by training their bodies to adapt to conditions that would debilitate other species. Humans surviving in toxic atmospheres by creating closed-loop environmental systems that other species had deemed impossible. You see weakness where I see the greatest strength in the galaxy, Kethvar said. The ability to become more than what you were. Marcus felt his understanding of his entire mission shifting. Is that why you've been watching me? Because I'm human? I have been watching you because you represent something that your own species does not yet understand about itself. You came to this station believing you were here to study how other species perceive humans. In truth, you are here because your species is on the verge of a transformation that will reshape the galaxy. Keth stepped forward, his warrior's instincts clearly struggling with concepts that went beyond traditional military thinking. What kind of transformation? Are the humans planning some kind of attack? Kethvar's attention turned to the young Keptari, and Marcus could see the warrior struggling with the entity's overwhelming presence. Not an attack, young soldier, an evolution. Your species has spent countless generations perfecting the art of warfare. The humans are perfecting the art of becoming whatever they need to become. Dr. Chen was taking readings with a portable scanner, though Marcus suspected the conventional sensors would be useless for analyzing something like Kethvar. The evolutionary adaptations you're describing should take thousands of generations to manifest. How are humans accomplishing them so quickly? Through intelligence, determination, and a refusal to accept that any problem is unsolvable. Your species modifies your environment, your technology, your social structures, and even your biology to meet challenges. You do not wait for natural selection to provide solutions. You create them. The implications were staggering. Marcus thought about Rodriguez's casual mastery of advanced technology, Dr. Chen's ability to solve problems that had stumped Keptari military scientists, and the countless other examples of humans exceeding expectations that he had been documenting. Why are you telling us this? He asked. What do you want from us? Kethvar moved closer, and Marcus could feel the weight of eons in the entity's presence. I want to offer you something that your species has never been given. Recognition from someone who has seen the rise and fall of 1,000 civilizations. I want to call you what you truly are. The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of the crystalline formations. Marcus could feel both Dr. Macchiel, Chen and Keth watching him, waiting for his response to something that he sensed was far more significant than a simple conversation. What are we? He asked finally. Apex predators who hunt problems instead of prey, Kethvar replied. The most dangerous species in the galaxy, disguised as the weakest. The inheritors of a universe that does not yet realize it has been claimed. The words hit Marcus like a physical force. Everything he thought he knew about humanity's place in the galaxy suddenly seemed like an elaborate deception, not one created by other species, but one that humanity itself had been unaware of maintaining. That's impossible, Doc Chen protested. We're barely holding our own in galactic civilization. Most species see us as barely competent servants. Because you have been hiding in plain sight, Kethvar explained. Your apparent weakness is the perfect camouflage for your true nature. No one suspects the soft, fragile humans of being capable of reshaping entire worlds to suit their needs. No one expects the naive newcomers to possess technologies and capabilities that veteran civilizations lack. Keth's military training was clearly struggling with these revelations. But humans have never conquered any systems. They have never demonstrated military superiority over any established species. Because conquest is an obsolete strategy, Kethvar said. Why conquer a world when you can adapt it? Why destroy an enemy when you can solve the problem that made them your enemy? Your species has developed beyond the need for the crude dominance displays that characterize younger civilizations. Marcus thought about his mission briefing, about the data he had been sent to collect. His superiors on Earth had known more than they had revealed, he realized. This wasn't just a study of interspecies relations. It was an assessment of whether humanity was ready to reveal its true capabilities to the galaxy. What happens now? He asked. Now you return to your observation mission, Kethvar replied, but with a new understanding of what you are observing. Watch how the galaxy reacts to your species, and ask yourself, are they preparing for the revelation that their weakest members are actually their most dangerous? The entity moved toward one of the chamber's impossible doorways. You have been given a gift that few beings in galactic history have received, the truth about your own nature.
What you do with that gift will determine the future of every civilization in known space.
As Kethvar began to fade into the shadows between dimensions, Marcus called out one final question. Why do you care what happens to humanity?
What is this to you? The ancient being paused, its form stabilizing for a moment. Because I have been alone among the apex species for longer than your star has existed, I had not hoped to see another ascend to true predator status in my lifetime. You are not just the galaxy's most dangerous species, young Terran. You are my first potential equals in 10,000 years. And with that, Kethvar vanished, leaving the three of them alone in a chamber that suddenly seemed far more ordinary, though no less impossible. The journey back to the inhabited sections of Nexus Prime passed in silence, each of them struggling to process what they had experienced. It was only when they reached the main concourse that Dr. Chen finally spoke. Marcus, if even half of what that entity told us is true, your mission has just become far more significant than either of us realized. Keth nodded slowly, his warrior's mind already beginning to grasp the strategic implications. The Keptari military has been fundamentally misassessing human capabilities. If other species have made similar errors, then the entire galaxy's understanding of the balance of power is based on false assumptions, Marcus finished. And sooner or later, that's going to cause problems. As they separated to return to their respective duties, Marcus realized that his simple observation mission had become something far more complex. He was no longer just studying how other species perceived humanity. He was preparing for the moment when humanity would have to decide whether to continue hiding its true nature or reveal to the galaxy that its weakest species was actually its apex predator. The choice, he suspected, would not be humanity's alone to make. The galaxy was about to discover the truth about the soft, fragile humans who had been quietly reshaping it from within. And not all species would welcome that revelation. The revelation in Kethvar's chamber changed everything about Marcus's perception of his mission, but it also raised disturbing questions about what other people knew. His failed communication with Earth suggested that his mission might be under some form of surveillance or interference, and he began to suspect that his presence on Nexus Prime was part of a larger operation that he hadn't been fully briefed on. 3 days after the encounter with the Voidstalker, those suspicions were confirmed in the most dramatic way possible. Marcus was in the station's central marketplace, documenting the complex web of trade relationships between different species when the first explosion shook the entire structure. Emergency klaxons began wailing as sections of the station automatically sealed themselves off to prevent atmosphere loss. The marketplace erupted into chaos as hundreds of beings from dozens of species scrambled for safety or tried to protect their valuable merchandise. Through the confusion, Marcus heard a sound that made his blood run cold, the distinctive whine of hegemony plasma weapons. The hegemony was a militant alliance of 3 species, the Vorthak, the Sektar, and the Grendeli, who had been expanding aggressively through the Outer Rim territories. They were known for their policy of taking what they wanted and eliminating any resistance with overwhelming force. All station personnel and visitors, came an announcement over the emergency communication system. Remain in your current locations. Nexus Prime is now under hegemony control. Any attempt to resist or evacuate will be met with lethal force. Marcus pressed himself against a collapsed vendor's stall and tried to assess the situation. Through the smoke and debris, He could see hegemony soldiers moving through the marketplace with ruthless efficiency. They were herding different species into separate groups: traders, researchers, diplomats, and support staff. Anyone who moved too slowly or tried to resist was immediately eliminated. What struck Marcus as particularly ominous was how organized the assault appeared to be. The hegemony forces knew exactly where to strike to disable the station's defenses, and they seemed to have detailed intelligence about the layout and population distribution. This wasn't a random raid. It was a carefully planned operation. "You, human," a Vorthax soldier barked, pointing his weapon at Marcus. "Join the others of your species over there." Marcus followed the soldier's gesture and saw a small group of humans being herded into a corner of the marketplace. He recognized several of them from his time on the station: Rodriguez, the maintenance worker, Dr. Chen, a few other researchers and support staff. As he joined the group, he noticed that they were being guarded more heavily than the other species groups, despite humans being supposedly the least dangerous beings present. Rodriguez caught his eye and made a subtle gesture toward the guards. Marcus looked more carefully and realized that the hegemony soldiers were nervous. These were experienced warriors who had conquered entire systems, yet they were treating a group of supposedly helpless humans like a serious threat. "What's going on?" Marcus whispered to Dr. Barr. Chen, when the guard's attention was elsewhere. "I think we're about to find out exactly how much the galaxy really knows about us," she replied quietly. "Look at their equipment." Marcus examined the soldiers' gear more carefully and felt his stomach drop. These weren't standard conquest weapons. The hegemony forces were equipped with specialized restraint systems, neural disruptors, and containment fields, the kind of equipment used for capturing and controlling exceptionally dangerous prisoners. The hegemony commander entered the marketplace, accompanied by a figure that Marcus recognized from intelligence briefings: General Vexthok, one of the most ruthless military leaders in known space. Vexthok had personally overseen the conquest of 17 systems and was known for his complete lack of mercy toward any species that opposed hegemony expansion. "Citizens of Nexus Prime," Vexthok announced, his voice carrying easily across the damaged marketplace. "You are now subjects of the hegemony. Most of you will be processed and relocated to appropriate work assignments within our territories. However, we have specific requirements for members of certain species." The general's attention turned toward the human group, and Marcus saw something in his expression that he hadn't expected: fear, not the healthy respect that a professional warrior might show toward a dangerous opponent, but genuine, barely controlled terror. "The humans present will be transferred immediately to specialized containment facilities," Vexthok continued. "They are to be considered extremely dangerous and are not to be approached without proper precautions." A murmur of confusion rippled through the assembled crowd. The idea of humans being dangerous enough to require specialized containment struck most species as absurd. Several of the alien prisoners began laughing, clearly amused by the hegemony's apparent paranoia. That laughter died quickly when General Vexthok turned his weapon on one of the laughing Drakti traders and vaporized him instantly. "Let me be absolutely clear," the general said coldly. "The human species represents an existential threat to galactic stability. Our intelligence indicates that they have been systematically infiltrating and subverting established civilizations while maintaining the pretense of being a primitive support species. They are not what they appear to be." Marcus felt his heart racing. Someone had figured it out. Someone had discovered what Kethvar had revealed to them: that humanity's apparent weakness was a cover for capabilities that most species couldn't comprehend. Dr. Chen was staring at the general with undisguised fascination. "Marcus," she whispered, "I don't think this is a random conquest. I think this is specifically about us." Before Marcus could respond, another explosion rocked the station. But this one was different. Instead of the destructive blast of hegemony weapons, it sounded like something had exploded outward from inside the station's structure. Emergency lighting flickered and failed, plunging sections of the marketplace into darkness. "Sir," one of the hegemony soldiers reported to General Vexthok, "we're detecting massive system failures throughout the station. Someone is sabotaging our control systems from the inside." The general's expression grew even more grim. "Lockdown protocols. Full neural suppression fields around all human prisoners. If even one of them gets loose..." He didn't finish the sentence, but Marcus could see the fear in his eyes growing stronger. Whatever the hegemony knew about human capabilities, it was enough to terrify one of the galaxy's most experienced military commanders. The next few minutes were a blur of activity as the hegemony forces tried to implement their containment protocols while dealing with escalating technical failures throughout the station. Marcus watched in growing amazement as systems that should have been completely under hegemony control began malfunctioning in ways that seemed almost intentional. The atmospheric processes that Rodriguez had been working on days earlier began producing localized gravity distortions that made it impossible for the hegemony soldiers to maintain their footing in certain areas. Environmental control started creating isolated pockets of different atmospheric compositions, forcing the soldiers to constantly adjust their equipment or risk suffocation. Even the artificial lighting began flickering in patterns that seemed designed to disrupt the soldiers' visual targeting systems. "How is this possible?" one of the hegemony officers demanded. "We control all the station's primary systems. Unless someone had been modifying those systems without our knowledge," General Vexstock replied grimly. "Which is exactly what human infiltrators would do." Rodriguez caught Marcus's attention again, and this time his expression was completely different from the humble maintenance worker Marcus had first encountered. There was intelligence in his eyes, cold, calculating, and absolutely confident. He made a subtle gesture toward one of the environmental control panels, and Marcus realized with shock that Rodriguez was somehow controlling the station's malfunctions. "Chen," Marcus whispered urgently, "Rodriguez isn't just a maintenance worker." "I know," she replied, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction that Marcus found disturbing. "Neither am I." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, Dr. Chen stepped forward and addressed General Vexstock directly. "General, I believe there's been a misunderstanding about the situation you've created here." Vexstock spun toward her, his weapon raised. "Human prisoner will remain silent or be terminated." Dr. Chen smiled, and Marcus finally understood why Kethvar had called humans apex predators. Her expression was that of a hunter who had been playing with her prey and had decided the game was over. "I'm afraid I can't do that, General. You see, this entire operation has been a rather elaborate test, and you've just provided us with some very valuable data about hegemony intelligence capabilities." The marketplace fell silent except for the continuing sounds of system failures throughout the station. Marcus stared at Dr. Bowl, Chen in shock, beginning to realize that his mission had been something entirely different from what he had believed.
"You want to know what humans really are? Dr.
Chen continued, her voice carrying clearly across the ruined marketplace. "We're the species that has been quietly evaluating every major military power in the galaxy for the past 50 years. We're the ones who have been determining which civilizations represent potential threats to galactic stability and which ones might be suitable for integration into a more peaceful order." General Vexstock's expression shifted from fear to rage. "Impossible. Human technology is decades behind hegemony capabilities." "Is it?" Rodriguez asked, speaking for the first time since the attack began. As he spoke, every hegemony weapon in the marketplace simultaneously powered down, their energy cells mysteriously draining, despite being fully charged moments before. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like your superior technology just became very expensive paperweights." The hegemony soldiers stared at their useless weapons in disbelief. Some tried to switch to backup power systems, only to discover that those had failed as well. Others reached for traditional kinetic weapons, only to find that the molecular bonds in the metal had somehow been destabilized, causing the weapons to crumble at the first touch. "This is impossible," Vexstock repeated, but his voice now carried desperation rather than anger. "No," said a new voice from the shadows at the edge of the marketplace. "This is what evolution looks like." Marcus turned and felt his world shift again. The speaker was Captain Sarah Torres of the Earth Strategic Defense Force, a woman who was supposed to be commanding humanity's most advanced starship in a system 300 light-years away. She was walking calmly through a group of what Marcus had thought were hegemony prisoners, but who were now clearly revealed to be human operatives in sophisticated disguises. "Hello, Marcus," Captain Torres said as she approached their group. "I hope your observational mission has been educational, though I suspect the real education is just beginning." Marcus stared at her in complete confusion. "Captain Torres, what are you doing here? How did you get here? And how did you coordinate this, whatever this is?" Torres smiled with the same predatory confidence that Marcus was starting to recognize as uniquely human. "Marcus, the mission you were briefed on was real, but it was only a small part of a much larger operation. We needed to know how different species would react when they discovered the truth about human capabilities. The hegemony's assault on this station was, encouraged, shall we say, to provide us with exactly that data." General Vexstock was backing away slowly, His military training wore in with the growing realization that he had walked into a trap far more sophisticated than anything he had encountered in decades of warfare. "You planned this entire attack?" he demanded. "We planned your response to intelligence we carefully allowed you to discover," Dr. Chen corrected. "We wanted to see how the galaxy's most aggressive military alliance would react to the possibility that humans were more dangerous than they appeared. Your behavior has been very informative." Marcus felt like the universe was reshaping itself around him. Every assumption he had made about his mission, about the people he had met, about humanity's role in galactic civilization, was proving to be fundamentally wrong. "Captain," he said slowly, "exactly how much of what I've experienced on this station has been real?" Torres considered the question carefully. "Your observations have been real, Marcus. The reactions you've documented, the attitudes you've encountered, all of that reflects genuine galactic perceptions of humanity. What wasn't real was the assumption that those perceptions were accurate." She gestured towards the disabled hegemony forces, who were now completely surrounded by humans who had somehow materialized from every section of the marketplace. "As you can see, the galaxy's understanding of human capabilities has been somewhat incomplete." Marcus was about to ask another question when he noticed movement in the shadows at the edge of his vision. Kethvar was there, watching the proceedings with what might have been approval. "The young Terran begins to understand," the ancient entity said, its voice reaching only Marcus. "Your species has been preparing for this revelation for much longer than you knew. The question now is whether the galaxy is ready for the truth." General Vextok heard Kethvar's voice and spun toward the shadows, his face going pale. "What is that thing? What are you humans involved with?" Captain Torres followed his gaze but showed no surprise at seeing the Void Stalker. "That, General, is someone who recognized what humanity really was long before we figured it out ourselves. Someone who has been waiting a very long time for another apex species to emerge." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. This wasn't just about humanity revealing its capabilities to the galaxy. This was about humanity taking its place among the universe's apex predators, with the guidance and approval of entities that had transcended normal galactic civilization entirely. The game was over, but Marcus was just beginning to understand what the real game had always been. The aftermath of the hegemony's failed operation transformed Nexus Prime into something unprecedented in galactic history. A neutral station where the fundamental assumptions about interspecies power dynamics had been shattered in full view of representatives from dozens of civilizations. Marcus stood in the observation lounge 3 days later, watching as ships from across the galaxy maintained their distance from the station. Word of what had happened was spreading through established communication networks faster than light-speed travel, and the reactions were as varied as the species receiving the information. Some civilizations were demanding immediate military action against the human threat. Others were requesting diplomatic meetings to reassess their relationships with Earth. A few of the more prescient species were quietly beginning to evacuate their outer rim territories, apparently deciding that discretion was the better part of valor. "Having second thoughts about your career choice?" Captain Torres asked as she joined him at the observation windows. Marcus considered the question seriously. "I'm still trying to figure out what my career actually is. 3 days ago, I thought I was a graduate student studying interspecies relations. Now it turns out I'm some kind of advanced scout for humanity's emergence as a galactic superpower." "Both things can be true," Torres pointed out. "Your academic training is what made you suitable for this mission. Understanding how different species think and react is going to be crucial for what comes next." "Which is what exactly?" Torres activated a holographic display that showed the current positions of major fleet movements throughout the galaxy. Marcus was disturbed to see that several military alliances were repositioning their forces in ways that suggested they were preparing for large-scale conflict. "The galaxy has just learned that its weakest species has been operating with capabilities that exceed most of their own," Torres explained. "Some species are going to try to destroy us before we can become a greater threat. Others are going to try to ally with us before their neighbors gain an advantage. And a few are going to try to understand what they missed about us and how they can avoid making similar mistakes with other species." Marcus studied the fleet movements more carefully. The patterns were ominous. Too many major powers moving too many ships towards human-controlled space for this to be anything other than preparation for war. "How long do we have before someone tries to eliminate Earth entirely?" "According to our strategic projections, about 6 months before the first coordinated attack. Maybe 18 months before someone develops weapons specifically designed to counter our advantages." The timeline was shorter than Marcus had expected, but he realized he shouldn't be surprised. If the galaxy had just discovered that their assumptions about human capabilities were completely wrong, the logical response would be to eliminate the threat before it could grow larger.
What about the hegemony forces? Marcus asked. What happened to General Vegstock and his troops? Torres's expression grew more serious.
That's where things get complicated. Vegstock wasn't just leading a random conquest operation. He was carrying out specific orders from the Hegemony Council based on intelligence they had gathered about human activities throughout their territory. She activated another display showing Hegemony space, with dozens of systems marked in red. Over the past 5 years, every major Hegemony expansion effort has been mysteriously thwarted. Planets they intended to conquer developed unexpected defensive capabilities. Species they planned to subjugate suddenly acquired technologies that made them too expensive to defeat. Military campaigns that should have been routine conquests turned into prolonged, resource-draining conflicts. Marcus began to see the pattern, and they figured out that humans were somehow involved. More than that. They figured out that humans were systematically interfering with their expansion plans across dozens of systems. What they didn't figure out was how we were doing it, or why their own intelligence networks couldn't detect our operations. Dr. Chen approached their group carrying a data tablet that displayed information Marcus didn't recognize. Captain, we've finished analyzing the Hegemony's intelligence files. Their assessment of human capabilities was actually quite accurate. They just couldn't believe their own data. She handed the tablet to Torres, who reviewed it quickly before showing it to Marcus. What he saw made him understand why General Vegstock had been so terrified.
The Hegemony files contain detailed documentation of human activities throughout their territory, but the activities described seemed impossible for the weak, primitive species that humans were supposed to be.
Humans had apparently been infiltrating Hegemony research facilities and copying their most advanced technologies.
Human agents had been manipulating Hegemony political systems to prevent certain military campaigns. Human operatives had been sabotaging Hegemony supply chains and communication networks with such subtlety that the damage wasn't discovered until months or years later. This is a picture of systematic intelligence warfare on a scale that should require resources no single species possesses, Marcus said after reviewing the files. How long has this been going on? Longer than you might think, Torres admitted. Earth's first contact with galactic civilization wasn't the peaceful trade mission that most species remember. It was a reconnaissance operation, designed to assess threats to human expansion and development plans. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. First contact was a lie. First contact was incomplete disclosure, Dr. Ped. Chen corrected. We did come seeking trade and peaceful relations. We just didn't mention that we were also conducting the most comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation in galactic history while we were at it. Marcus sank into one of the lounge chairs, trying to process the implications. So everything I thought I knew about humanity's place in the galaxy was wrong from the beginning. Not wrong, Torres said gently. Carefully managed. We needed time to understand the galactic political landscape, to identify potential threats and allies, and to develop the capabilities we would need to protect ourselves when our true nature was eventually revealed. And now it has been revealed. Thanks to you, actually. Your mission provided us with crucial data about how different species react when they suspect humans might be more capable than they appear. The Hegemony's response was exactly what our models predicted, which means our defensive preparations should be adequate. Marcus looked up at her in alarm. Defensive preparations? Before Torres could answer, the observation lounge's lighting dimmed and Kethvar materialized from the shadows between the chairs. The ancient entity's presence was less overwhelming than it had been in the hidden chamber, but Marcus could still feel the weight of eons in its regard. The young Terran asks important questions, Kethvar said. Perhaps it is time for him to understand the full scope of what his species has accomplished. The entity gestured, and the holographic displays around them expanded, to show not just the local galactic region, but star maps covering thousands of systems across multiple spiral arms. Hundreds of systems were marked with symbols Marcus didn't recognize, but the pattern was unmistakable. Those are human settlements, Marcus said slowly, but there are hundreds of them. Thousands. Your species has been expanding and developing for far longer than galactic records indicate, Kethvar explained. While other civilizations focused on controlling territory, humans focused on understanding and adapting to new environments. You have established presence in systems that other species considered uninhabitable, developed technologies that other civilizations deemed impossible,
and created social structures that allow for cooperation on scales that exceed most galactic alliances. Torres nodded.
What you're seeing is 50 years of systematic human expansion disguised as individual colonies, research outposts, and trade missions. Each settlement was designed to appear small and insignificant, but collectively they represent the largest colonization effort in recorded galactic history. Barker studied the star map more carefully and realized that the human settlements weren't randomly distributed. They formed a complex network that surrounded and intersected with the territories of every major galactic power.
It's a containment strategy, he said finally. You've surrounded everyone else. We've positioned ourselves to monitor and influence galactic developments. Dr. Hoku Nagonik, Chen corrected. The last 50 years have been an extended assessment period to determine which species represent genuine threats to galactic stability and which ones are potential partners in a more peaceful future. And what have you concluded? Torres and Dr. Hyde. Chen exchanged glances before Torres answered. We've concluded that the current galactic power structure is unsustainable. Too many species solve problems through conquest rather than cooperation. Too many civilizations view other species as resources to be exploited rather than partners to be respected. And too many governments prioritize short-term dominance over long-term survival. Marcus felt a chill as he realized the implications. You're talking about reshaping galactic civilization entirely. We're talking about ensuring that galactic civilization survives the next 1,000 years, Torres replied. Current expansion patterns and resource consumption rates indicate that major interspecies warfare is inevitable within the next few centuries. When that happens, the destruction will be absolute. Kefar moved closer to the displays, its ancient form seeming to merge with the holographic stars. This is why your species interests me so greatly, young Terran. You possess the rarest capability in the universe, the ability to think beyond the immediate needs of your own survival and consider the welfare of others as part of your own long-term strategy. Not all species would see it that way, Marcus pointed out. To them, this looks like an elaborate plan for human dominance disguised as benevolent intervention, and they would be partially correct. Dr. Chen admitted, humans will have enormous influence over the future development of galactic civilization, but that influence will be exercised to promote cooperation, sustainable development, and peaceful conflict resolution rather than conquest and exploitation. A new voice joined the conversation, one that made everyone in the lounge turn in surprise. The question is whether other species will accept that influence voluntarily or whether it will need to be imposed. The speaker was General Vexstock, but he looked very different from the terrified military commander who had been captured 3 days earlier. His hegemony uniform had been replaced by simple civilian clothing, and his expression showed thoughtful consideration rather than anger or fear. General, Torres said carefully, I wasn't expecting to see you here. I requested permission to speak with you, Vexstock replied. The past 3 days have given me considerable time to think about the situation my forces encountered, and I have reached some conclusions that may interest you. Marcus studied the hegemony commander with growing fascination. What kind of conclusions? The Hegemony Council sent me here to capture or eliminate what they believe to be a small group of human infiltrators. Instead, I discovered that my entire understanding of galactic power structures was fundamentally flawed. That kind of revelation tends to change one's perspective on many things. Vexstock moved to one of the observation windows and stared out at the ships maintaining their wary distance from Nexus Prime. My species, the Vorthak, achieved spaceflight through conquest and subjugation. We believed that strength was measured by the ability to dominate others, and we built our entire civilization around that principle. It never occurred to us that there might be forms of strength that didn't involve forcing others to submit. And now? Torres asked. Now I understand why hegemony expansion efforts have been failing. You haven't been fighting us. You've been teaching us that our approach to galactic relations is obsolete. Every time we tried to conquer a world, you showed us that the resources we would gain weren't worth the costs we would incur. Every time we planned a military campaign, you demonstrated that cooperation would achieve better results than conquest. Dr. Chen looked impressed. That's a remarkably sophisticated understanding of strategic influence operations. Vexstock turned back to face the group, and Marcus was startled to see something like respect in the warrior's expression. Humans are the most dangerous opponents I have ever encountered, because you fight wars that your enemies don't realize are happening until they've already lost. But you're also the most honorable opponents I've encountered because your goal isn't to destroy your enemies. It's to make them unnecessary.
Kethvar's attention focused on the hegemony general with increased interest. The warrior begins to understand the true nature of apex predation. Fascinating. What do you mean? Marcus asked. Most species view predation as the ability to kill and consume prey, Kethvar explained. But true apex predators don't just kill. They reshape entire ecosystems to support their continued existence. Humans aren't just eliminating threats to galactic stability. You're creating conditions where those threats cannot arise in the first place. The implications were staggering. Marcus realized that humanity's emergence as a galactic superpower wasn't just about revealing hidden capabilities. It was about fundamentally changing how civilized species interacted with each other. General Vexthok, Torres said carefully, what do you intend to do with this understanding? The Vorthak warrior was quiet for a long moment before answering. I intend to return to hegemony space and explain to the Council that their current strategic paradigms are based on obsolete assumptions about the nature of strength and power. Whether they listen to me or not will determine whether the hegemony becomes part of the new galactic order or whether it becomes an example of what happens to civilizations that refuse to adapt. And if they refuse to listen, Vexthok's expression grew grim. Then they will discover that humans aren't the only species capable of learning new forms of warfare. I have spent my entire career studying military strategy, and what I witnessed here has taught me more about real power than a lifetime of conquest ever could. Torres nodded slowly. You're welcome to return to hegemony space whenever you choose, General. In fact, we'd prefer that you do. The message you carry will be far more effective coming from a respected military leader than from human diplomats. As if summoned by their conversation, Rodriguez appeared in the lounge entrance. But like everyone else Marcus had encountered on this mission, the maintenance worker was clearly something other than what he had initially appeared to be. Captain, Rodriguez said, we're receiving communication requests from 17 different civilizations. Most of them are requesting clarification about human capabilities and intentions. A few are requesting immediate military alliance agreements. And the others? 3 species are requesting permission to surrender preemptively, and 1 civilization is asking if we're accepting applications for vassal status. Marcus couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. 3 days ago, humans had been viewed as the weakest species in the galaxy. Now entire civilizations were trying to surrender before any conflict had even begun. What about Earth's response? He asked. How is the home government handling this revelation? Torres smiled with what Marcus was beginning to recognize as characteristic human confidence. Earth has been preparing for this moment for 50 years, Marcus. The revelation that humans are more capable than previously believed isn't a crisis for us. It's the successful completion of the longest and most complex strategic deception operation in galactic history. So what happens now? Now we find out which species are capable of adapting to a universe where cooperation is more valuable than conquest, where intelligence is more important than physical strength, and where long-term thinking takes precedence over short-term advantage, Dr. Chen said. Kethvar moved towards the observation windows, its ancient form beginning to fade as it prepared to return to whatever realm it normally inhabited. The galaxy stands at a threshold, young Terran. Your species has demonstrated that evolution doesn't end with spaceflight, it continues with wisdom. Whether other species choose to evolve as well will determine the shape of civilization for millennia to come. As the Voidstalker disappeared entirely, Marcus found himself staring out at the ship surrounding Nexus Prime with a completely different understanding of what he was seeing. Those weren't just representatives of different civilizations maintaining cautious distance from a neutral station. They were witnesses to the moment when the galaxy's understanding of itself had fundamentally changed. Marcus, Torres said quietly, your real mission is just beginning. We need observers and analysts throughout galactic space to monitor how different species respond to these revelations. Your academic training and your experience here make you ideal for that role. Diplomatic intelligence? Cultural evolution guidance, Dr. Chen corrected. We're going to help the galaxy learn new ways of thinking about strength, power, and cooperation. But we can't do that without understanding how each species processes these concepts. Marcus looked around the observation lounge one last time, taking in the faces of people he had thought he understood, in a place he had thought he knew, serving a mission he had thought was simple. Everything had been more complex than it appeared, but that complexity had served a purpose that was actually quite simple, ensuring that the galaxy's most dangerous species were also its most responsible ones.
When do I start? Torres handed him a datapad containing information about his new assignment.
You already have. Welcome to the real diplomatic corps, Marcus. Your first assignment is to return to Earth and help prepare the next generation of observers. Because if this operation has taught us anything, it's that the galaxy still has a lot to learn about what humans are really capable of. As Marcus reviewed his new orders, he couldn't help but smile. He had come to Nexus Prime as a young graduate student, hoping to understand how other species viewed humanity. He was leaving as an agent of change, carrying the knowledge that humanity wasn't just another species trying to find its place in galactic civilization. It was the species that would define what that civilization could become. The mocking had indeed stopped. But more importantly, the galaxy was about to discover that its newest apex predator was also its greatest hope for a future where all species could thrive. In the shadows between dimensions, Kethvar watched the young human with approval. For the first time in 10,000 years, it had found a species worthy of being called brother. The hunt was over, but the real adventure was just beginning. The universe had gained its newest guardians, and they wore the faces of the species everyone had dismissed as too weak to matter. It was, the ancient entity reflected, exactly the kind of beautiful irony that made existence worthwhile. The stars themselves seemed to shine a little brighter as humanity took its place among the apex civilizations of the galaxy. And for the first time since the progenitors had vanished into legend, Kethvar was no longer alone among the cosmic predators. The galaxy would never be the same, and that, as any apex species could tell you, was exactly the point.